Scala.
Good evening. Good evening. My name is Mike Scala. I was born and raised in Rosedale. And I'm running for Congress because I believe we need some regular people like you and me in office. If our priorities are ensuring that everyday people's needs are being met, we need to elect representatives who will feel the same pain as their constituents if those priorities are not met. I believe that's the only way democracy can work. So I don't believe we should see any cuts to Medicare, Social Security, Medicaid. There should be no cuts to education. Unfortunately, that's exactly what we're getting from Congress, and that's one of the reasons why I believe Congress has failed us. The Budget Control Act in particular of 2011 cut Medicare provider payments by 2%, and it cut student loans. It eliminated subsidized student loans for postgraduate students. I believe that's reckless, irresponsible, and quite frankly, inexcusable. I believe that the Bush tax cuts for the wealthiest Americans should not be renewed. And in Congress, I will not vote to extend the Bush tax cuts for the wealthiest Americans. As President Obama believes, if you're making $250,000 or below, you should not see your taxes increased. But the wealthiest Americans should see their taxes restored to what they were under President Clinton. Now, I believe that we need to make investments in our infrastructure. In a time like this, we should be creating and not cutting jobs. You know, Southeast Queens was and continues to be the epicenter of the foreclosure crisis in New York State. One of the ways to prevent foreclosures is to make sure people don't lose their jobs. So we need to make sure that we're creating jobs. We can and we should invest in our infrastructure, and that not only entails fixing roads, bridges, and tunnels, although that must be done, it's important. We should also work to make America more compliant with the 21st century. So that includes getting our broadband networks improved, working on our internet, high-speed rail, I think we should be looking into in this country. We should be working and investing in alternative energy sources. There are a number of things that we could do to improve our infrastructure now, which will not only create jobs in the short term, but in the long term, if our infrastructure is more compliant and more consistent and more up to speed with the rest of the world, that will incentivize companies to produce higher manufacture domestically. So in the long term, it helps our economy as well. I believe that's really a shortcoming of government and Congress right now. We're too focused on the short term. We need to look into the long term, look more into the future, and I believe education is at the forefront of what our long-term economic strategy should be. As I mentioned, the Budget Control Act cut funding for education, which is inexcusable. A more educated nation means we have more innovation, more jobs, more industry in America, which is exactly what we need. But I think our entire approach to education is wrong too. You know, No Child Left Behind does not work, and I would not vote to continue that program. We should discontinue that. There's too much of an emphasis on standardized testing. We're looking too much at quantitative numbers, and it just doesn't work. Number one, it incentivizes teachers to teach to the test and not to provide the education to meet the unique needs of their classrooms. And I don't think it's fair to compare students who come from different backgrounds. You know, one student may not have adequate supplies or the resources needed, and you're comparing him or her to a student that's got, you know, an abundance of supplies. And then in turn, you're giving the money to places that really don't need it, because under No Child Left Behind, you're giving money to the areas with the higher scores. So I think that whole approach is wrong. I also am a proponent and supporter of the DREAM Act, which would enable people who were brought to this country through no fault of their own, who meet certain requirements, who are in good standing, to receive an education in the U.S. and to obtain a humane path to citizenship, which would in turn incentivize them to stay in this country and contribute to our economy. You know, my grandfather was an immigrant. I strongly believe in immigration, and that immigration is really the lifeblood of our economy. I believe also that we should be including people and not making people feel alienated or excluded from society, which brings me to Stop and Frisk, which I believe has to be stopped. You know, the Supreme Court spoke about this in 1968, and they said that in order for Stop and Frisk to be constitutionally permissible, the officer has to have a reasonable suspicion that the person is armed and dangerous. Now, according to the NYPD's own numbers, 88% of the time last year, the person was innocent. So if they're wrong almost 9 times out of 10, they're not only stopping and frisking people they reasonably suspect to be armed and dangerous. So we really need to look into that policy. I support a full investigation behind that. I want an articulation as to what that policy is, because we don't even really know. And probably we're going to have to just stop it altogether, because it's not working, and it's counterproductive to our society. I also believe that money has too much influence in politics. You know, the Supreme Court Citizens United decision is not a good one. It's really symbolic of the fact that money just controls everything. Elections are bought. You know, corporations should not be able to spend as much money, unlimited amounts of money, to buy elections. And one of my priorities in Congress, in fact, one of my first priorities, will be to lead the movement to overturn that Citizens United decision with a constitutional amendment. It can be done, and it will be done.
1 minute.
Thank you. Not only are elections being bought, unfortunately, but now we're seeing laws being bought, which is a sad and unfortunate thing in itself. There was recently a story that Emigrant Bank is the beneficiary of a new law that's passing through the House right now, where out of over 7,000 banks in the country, this law that's being passed will only benefit this one bank, Emigrant Bank. And it turns out that the owner of the bank and his family donated a lot of money to the co-sponsors of the bill. Which, you know, I think when I see something like that, it really just reminds me how Congress has failed us. We need new faces, a new direction. And what we're doing now is just not sustainable. We really need to take this country and take our community in a different direction. And I look forward to working with each and every one of you and addressing the community's concerns. My website is scalaforcongress.com, and I'm happy to take any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you.